Chapter 31A, Circumflex Euro's first day. At Westbridge, the trauma bay looked like a battlefield. Doctors moved in every direction. Nurses pushed equipment carts across the room. Paramedics delivered patient reports. Monitors beeped constantly. And in the center of it all stood Professor Adrian Cross. Calm, focused, completely in control. Ethan had seen busy emergency departments before. Rowan handled serious cases regularly. His was different. Westbridge operated on another level. 6 accident victims arrived almost simultaneously. Each required immediate evaluation. Each required decisions. And every second mattered. Room 3. Professor Cross pointed toward one of the incoming patients. Then he looked directly at Ethan. "You're with Dr. Morgan." Ethan nodded immediately. "Yes, Professor." A young attending physician approached. Dr. Amelia Morgan, early 30s, trauma surgeon, sharp eyes, fast movements, the type of doctor who looked busy even when standing still. "Follow me." That was her entire introduction. The patient was a middle-aged man involved in the highway collision. Several broken ribs, possible lung injury, low oxygen levels, unstable condition. Dr. Morgan immediately began the assessment. Questions, examinations, orders, instructions. Everything happened rapidly. Ethan assisted where he could, recording findings, preparing equipment, reviewing imaging results, trying not to fall behind. The pace was exhausting. Rowan, he often had time to think, time to analyze, time to discuss. Westbridge gave him none of those luxuries. Here, decisions happened immediately. Several hours later, the department finally became calmer. Most patients had been stabilized. Emergency surgeries were underway. Critical cases had been transferred. Ethan felt exhausted. It was only noon. While reviewing charts at a workstation, a familiar notification appeared. Westbridge evaluation active. Current performance. Adaptability. 72. Clinical efficiency. 68. Team coordination. 74. Recommended improvement. Decision speed. Ethan frowned. The system wasn't wrong. He had noticed it himself. His knowledge was improving. His technical skills were improving. But compared to Westbridge residents, he was slower. Not dramatically slower. Just enough to matter. And in trauma medicine, small differences mattered. That afternoon, another surprise arrived. The exchange residents were called to a conference room. Inside sat several senior physicians, including Professor Cross. A large screen displayed departmental statistics, performance evaluations, rotation rankings, training schedules. Then Professor Cross stood. "Most of you came here believing you are talented." Nobody spoke. "Some of you are." A few residents exchanged glances. "Talent is useful," Cross continued, "but talent creates bad habits." The room became quieter. People who rely on talent stop improving. Ethan immediately remembered Dr. Graham saying something similar. Perhaps great surgeons all shared certain beliefs. Cross changed the screen. A list appeared. Monthly resident assessment. Several names filled the display. Westbridge residents, St. Victoria residents, Royal Medical Institute residents, and exchange residents. Ethan searched for his name, then found it. Current rotation ranking, 12th place, out of 60 residents. Not bad, not amazing, but respectable. Nearby, Ryan ranked 7th. As expected, Noah Bennett ranked 1st. Also expected, the difference between 1st and 12th looked small. Only a few points. Yet Ethan understood something. At this level, every point represented hundreds of hours of effort. That evening after returning to his apartment, Ethan entered the surgical simulation system. A new challenge appeared. Westbridge speed assessment. Objective. Improve clinical decision speed. Difficulty. Very high. Reward. Advanced trauma recognition. Without hesitation, Ethan accepted. The simulation immediately began. Case after case appeared. 30 seconds. Decide. 20 seconds. Decide. 15 seconds. Decide. The pressure was relentless. The system wasn't teaching medicine. It was teaching speed, and speed was exactly what Westbridge demanded. 4 simulation hours later, Ethan finally completed the challenge. Reward granted. Decision speed +3. Emergency response +2. Current evaluation score 79. Ethan smiled. Slowly, steadily, he was improving again. Outside his apartment window, the lights of Capital City illuminated the night sky. Tomorrow would bring more patients, more challenges, more competition, and somewhere inside Westbridge Medical Center, a new chapter of his journey was just beginning. End of Chapter 31. Chapter 32A. Circumflex Euros. The golden hour. 3 days passed. Ethan was slowly adapting to life at Westbridge Medical Center. Slowly, but not fast enough. Every morning began before sunrise. Every evening ended long after sunset. And somehow, despite the endless hours, there was always more work waiting. Westbridge never slowed down. Unlike St. Rowan, where departments occasionally had quiet periods, Westbridge seemed permanently busy. Patients arrived constantly. Emergency calls never stopped. Trauma alerts echoed through the halls almost every day. The hospital handled cases from across the kingdom. Complex injuries, rare conditions, severe trauma. Cases most hospitals would immediately transfer. For a young resident, the experience was overwhelming and exciting. That morning began with a trauma conference. Professor Adrian Cross stood at the front of the room reviewing a recent case. A highway accident, multiple injuries, massive blood loss. Dozens of residents listened carefully. What determines survival? Cross suddenly asked. Several hands immediately rose. Blood transfusion. No. Surgical intervention. No. Critical care management. No. One answer after another. Each rejected. Finally, Professor Cross turned toward Ethan Vale. The room instantly became quiet. What determines survival? Ethan thought carefully, then remembered something he had studied. Something the simulation had repeated many times. The golden hour. Professor Cross nodded. Explain. Ethan stood. The first hour after major trauma is often the most important. Rapid assessment, rapid diagnosis, rapid treatment. He continued. The faster life-threatening injuries are identified and treated, the greater the chance of survival. Cross nodded again. For Professor Cross, that was practically a standing ovation. Conference continued, but several residents glanced toward Ethan afterward. Apparently, earning 2 approvals from Professor Cross in the same week was uncommon. Very uncommon. The day remained relatively calm, at least until noon. Then the trauma alert sounded. The atmosphere changed instantly. Doctors stood. Nurses moved. Phones rang. Another critical patient was incoming. Ethan followed Dr. Morgan toward the trauma bay. What do we know? 21-year Old female. High-speed vehicle collision. Possible abdominal trauma. Unstable blood pressure. Not good. When the ambulance doors opened, the seriousness became obvious. Patient looked pale, weak, barely conscious. Paramedics delivered their report. Blood pressure dropping. Rapid pulse. Abdominal tenderness. Signs of internal bleeding. Professor Cross arrived moments later. The trauma team immediately began working. For Ethan, the situation felt familiar. The symptoms, the urgency, the pressure. The surgical simulation system had forced him through similar scenarios dozens of times, perhaps hundreds, yet reality always felt different. Real patients had real consequences. The patient continued deteriorating. Blood pressure fell again. The trauma team needed answers. Fast. Imaging results arrived. Several doctors reviewed them simultaneously. Then Ethan noticed something. A subtle detail. Easy to miss. A possible splenic injury. The spleen. One of the most common sources of severe abdominal bleeding after trauma. His heart accelerated. Should he speak? The same question had appeared during the surgery with Dr. Reeves. A first-year resident challenging experienced doctors never felt comfortable. But hesitation wasted time. And time was blood. Professor Cross. The room briefly looked toward him. What? I think the spleen is the source. Silence. Cross immediately examined the images. Several seconds passed. Then he nodded. Good catch. The words hit Ethan harder than expected, because Professor Adrian Cross was not the type of person who handed out compliments, not even small ones. Within minutes, the patient was transferred to surgery. The trauma team moved rapidly, and several hours later, the operation succeeded. The damaged spleen had indeed been responsible. The bleeding was controlled. The patient survived. That evening, Ethan sat alone inside the hospital cafeteria, exhausted, thinking. Someone suddenly placed a tray opposite him. Noah Bennett, the Westbridge champion, sat down casually. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Noah smiled. Professor Cross complimented you today. Ethan nearly laughed. That was a compliment? Noah nodded seriously. It definitely was. Apparently Westbridge standards were different. Conversation continued. Unlike their first meeting, Noah seemed relaxed, almost friendly. You're adapting quickly. I'm trying. Most exchange residents struggle. Ethan appreciated the honesty. Then Noah leaned back slightly. You know what your biggest weakness is? The question caught him off guard. What? Noah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward Ethan's chest. You still think like a resident trying not to fail. Ethan frowned. Noah continued. The best doctors don't focus on avoiding mistakes. His expression became serious. They focus on making the right decision. For several moments, Ethan remained silent, because deep down, he knew Noah was right. Even now, part of him still worried about being wrong, still worried about speaking up, still worried about failing. Perhaps that mindset had helped him survive, but maybe it was now holding him back. Later that night, after entering the surgical simulation system, a new notification appeared. Psychological growth detected. Confidence barrier identified. New challenge available. Leadership development program. Difficulty extreme. Ethan stared at the screen, then slowly smiled. His Westbridge wasn't only changing his skills, it was changing him, and that might become even more important. End of Chapter 32. Chapter 33a. Circumflex Euros. The Leadership Challenge. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Westbridge Medical Center earlier than usual. Not because he had been assigned extra work, not because Professor Cross demanded it, because he couldn't stop thinking about Noah's words. You still think like a resident trying not to fail. The sentence had followed him all night. At first, he wanted to dismiss it. After all, avoiding mistakes was important. Medicine demanded caution. Lives depended on it. Yet the more he thought about it, the more he realized Noah had identified something real. Every time Ethan spoke during a case, he hesitated first. Every time he offered an opinion, he worried about being wrong. Every time he faced uncertainty, he searched for confirmation. The behavior wasn't obvious, but it existed, and at Westbridge, even small weaknesses became visible. The day started with rounds. Professor Cross led the trauma team through multiple patient evaluations. The questions came rapidly. Treatment priority? Possible complications? Alternative management options? Residents answered one after another. Most responses were correct. Some weren't. What surprised Ethan was something else entirely. Nobody seemed afraid of being wrong. They answered confidently, accepted corrections, moved on. The process looked completely different from what he experienced at St. Rowan. Here, confidence wasn't arrogance. It was expected. By midday, the trauma department became unusually quiet. For almost 30 minutes. A rare event. Then an announcement arrived. All exchange residents report to Simulation Center B. Immediately, confused residents gathered and headed toward the simulation building. The facility was enormous. Several floors dedicated entirely to training. Advanced mannequins. Virtual operating rooms. Emergency response simulations. Equipment worth millions. Ethan felt impressed before he even entered. Inside, nearly 60 residents assembled. Professor Cross stood at the front beside several senior physicians. A large display appeared behind them. Leadership assessment exercise. The room immediately became quieter. Professor Cross folded his arms. Medicine is a team activity. Nobody spoke. Knowledge matters. Technical skill matters. He paused, but eventually, every doctor must lead. The challenge rules appeared. Teams of 6 residents. Multiple emergency scenarios. Limited resources. Strict time limits. Each team would choose a leader. Ethan immediately hoped nobody selected him. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. After assignments were announced, Team 7 gathered around a table. Members included a resident from St. Victoria, 2 residents from Westbridge, 1 from Royal Medical Institute, 1 from East Harbor, and Ethan. Everyone looked at each other awkwardly. Then one of the Westbridge residents spoke. Ethan should lead. The suggestion caught him completely off guard. What? You won the trauma challenge. Another resident nodded. Agreed. Within 30 seconds, the decision was made. Before Ethan could object, he was team leader. A familiar system notification appeared. Leadership Development Program. Phase 1 activated. Objective. Lead successfully. Failure consequences. Evaluation penalty. Ethan nearly laughed. The system clearly enjoyed making his life difficult. The first scenario began. Industrial explosion. Multiple casualties. Limited operating rooms. Limited blood supply. The simulation room erupted into controlled chaos. Doctors requested instructions. Nurses needed priorities. Critical patients required decisions. For several seconds, Ethan froze. Not visibly. Not enough for others to notice. But internally, completely. Too many choices, too many possibilities, too many consequences. Then he remembered something Professor Cross often repeated. Indecision is still a decision. The moment clicked. Ethan took a breath, then began issuing orders. Patient 1 to surgery, Patient 3 to imaging, blood products prioritized for Patient 2, additional monitoring for Patient 5. The team immediately moved. For the first time, Ethan wasn't following instructions. He was giving them. The feeling was strange, terrifying, and strangely satisfying. The simulation continued for nearly an hour. Complications appeared constantly. A patient's condition worsened unexpectedly. An operating room became unavailable. Equipment malfunctioned. Every challenge forced rapid decisions. Yet something surprising happened. The more Ethan led, the more comfortable he became. Not perfect, not exceptional, but better, much better. When the scenario finally ended, the evaluation appeared. Team 7, overall score, 92. Rank, first place. The room erupted with conversation. Several residents looked genuinely surprised. Apparently nobody expected an exchange team led by a St. Rowan resident to finish first. Ethan wasn't sure what surprised him more, the result, or the fact that he had actually enjoyed leading. Later that evening, as residents left the simulation center, someone approached from behind. Professor Cross, the trauma chief, early sought people out, which immediately caught Ethan's attention. For several seconds, Cross studied him. Then he spoke. You hesitated. Ethan nodded. Yes, Professor. Cross nodded slightly, but less than before. That was it. Just one sentence. Yet somehow, it felt like the highest praise Ethan had received since arriving at Westbridge. That night, inside the surgical simulation system, a golden notification appeared. Leadership Development Program. Phase 1 complete. Leadership +5. Confidence +3. Decision-making +2. Special trait unlocked. Team Coordinator. Current evaluation score, 82. Ethan stared at the number. 82. The highest score he had ever achieved. Slowly but surely, the gap between him and the elite residents of Westbridge was shrinking, and for the first time, he was beginning to believe he truly belonged among them. End of Chapter 33. Chapter 34. A circumflex euros, the impossible operation. The following week began normally, which at Westbridge Medical Center meant complete chaos. Trauma calls, emergency consultations, patient rounds, case discussions, endless paperwork. For most residents, simply surviving the schedule felt like an achievement. For Ethan, however, things were becoming more complicated. His performance during the leadership assessment had attracted attention, not only from exchange residents, but from attending physicians as well. The attention wasn't always comfortable. At St. Rowan, he had been relatively unknown. At Westbridge, people were beginning to recognize his name, and recognition brought expectations. On Wednesday morning, Ethan arrived at the trauma department conference room. The weekly surgical review meeting was about to begin. Professor Adrian Cross entered precisely on time. As always, the patient's medical images immediately appeared on the screen. The room became quiet. Even experienced residents looked serious. The scans were not normal. Severe abdominal trauma, multiple organ injuries, extensive internal bleeding, a nightmare case. Professor Cross pointed toward the images. 28-year-old male, industrial accident, critical condition. Several physicians reviewed the scans carefully. The injuries were devastating. Liver damage, splenic injury, intestinal trauma, possible vascular involvement. One resident quietly muttered, impossible. Cross heard him. Nothing is impossible. The room immediately became silent again. Then the trauma chief surprised everyone. He began asking residents for treatment plans. One by one, most answers were reasonable. None impressed him. Then his eyes landed on Ethan Vale. The room immediately turned toward him. Again, Ethan was starting to hate that. What would you do? The question sounded simple. It wasn't. Several senior residents had already answered. Several attending physicians remained silent. This was not a beginner's case. Ethan examined the images, reviewed the data, considered the options. Then he spoke. Control bleeding first. Cross nodded slightly. Continue. Damage control surgery. Several residents looked surprised. Ethan continued. The patient is too unstable for a prolonged operation. Pointed toward the scans. Stop bleeding. Control contamination. Stabilize the patient. Definitive repair later. The room remained silent. Several attending physicians exchanged glances. Then Professor Cross nodded. Correct. A few residents visibly stiffened, because the answer wasn't obvious. Damage control surgery represented one of the most difficult concepts in trauma medicine. Instead of fixing everything immediately, surgeons focused on keeping the patient alive. Survive first, repair later. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As residents left, Ethan noticed several people watching him, including Noah Bennett. You're improving. The Westbridge champion sounded genuinely impressed. I'm trying. Noah laughed. That's becoming your favorite answer. Before Ethan could respond, a trauma alert echoed through the department. The conversation ended instantly. Everyone moved. Another emergency. Another patient. Another battle. By the time Ethan reached the trauma bay, paramedics were already arriving. The patient was young, maybe 30 years old. The report sounded familiar. Industrial accident. Crushing injury. Internal bleeding. Almost identical to the case discussed during the morning conference. The coincidence felt surreal. Professor Cross arrived moments later. The trauma chief listened to the report, reviewed the imaging, then made a decision. We're operating. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. Operating rooms were prepared. Surgical teams assembled. Blood products ordered. Everything moved rapidly. Then something unexpected happened. Professor Cross looked directly at Ethan. Ethan blinked. Sir? Scrub in. For a moment he thought he had misheard. This wasn't a routine operation. This was one of the most complex trauma cases he had ever seen. Even several senior residents looked shocked. Yet nobody questioned the decision, because Professor Cross rarely explained himself. The operating room felt colder than usual. Bright lights illuminated the surgical table. Monitors displayed unstable vital signs. Nurses prepared instruments. Anesthesiologists monitored every change. The pressure was immense. Then the surgery began. The first incision revealed exactly how severe the injuries were. Blood everywhere. Several organs damaged. Multiple bleeding sources. Tissue destruction. Even experienced surgeons looked serious. For the next 2 hours, Ethan witnessed trauma surgery at its highest level. Professor Cross moved with incredible precision. Calm, efficient, relentless. Every decision happened instantly. Every movement had purpose. For the first time, Ethan understood why people called him one of the kingdom's greatest trauma surgeons. Halfway through the operation, a complication occurred. Blood pressure dropped rapidly. The room immediately became tense. Several bleeding sources remained uncontrolled. Time was running out. Then Professor Cross extended a hand. Clamp. Without thinking, Ethan placed the correct instrument into his hand. Seconds later, suction. Correct again. Then, retractor. Again. Perfect. The surgery continued. The crisis passed. The patient stabilized. And several hours later, the operation ended successfully. As the team prepared to leave, Ethan finally relaxed. His scrubs were soaked with sweat. His entire body felt exhausted. Then Professor Cross removed his gloves. For several moments he said nothing. Then he looked toward Ethan. You've improved. Only 3 words. Yet Ethan felt more proud than he had after winning the trauma challenge, because compliments from Professor Cross were rarer than trophies. That evening, inside the surgical simulation system, a golden notification appeared. Major achievement. Participated in advanced trauma surgery. Rewards granted. Trauma surgery +5. Operating room awareness +4. Instrument coordination +3. Special unlock. Professor Cross evaluation path. Current evaluation score. 85. Ethan stared at the screen. 85. The highest score he had ever achieved. And for the first time, the system displayed something new. Comparison analysis. Noah Bennett. 88. Ethan Vale. 85. Difference. 3 points. Only 3. Ethan smiled. The gap that once felt impossible was finally within reach. End of Chapter 34. Chapter 35. I circumflex Euros, the research division. The operation became the most discussed case in the trauma department, not because the surgery was unusual. Westbridge performed difficult operations every day. What attracted attention was something else. Professor Adrian Cross had allowed a first-year exchange resident to participate. That almost never happened. Several residents noticed. Several attending physicians noticed. And unfortunately for Ethan, several competitors noticed as well. For the next few days, he felt eyes following him through the hospital. Nothing hostile, nothing obvious, just curiosity. The trauma challenge champion from St. Rowan was becoming difficult to ignore. On Monday morning, Ethan arrived for another trauma shift, expecting a normal day. He was wrong. A message waited in his inbox. Exchange rotation update. Effective immediately. Research division rotation. Duration. 2 weeks. Ethan stared at the screen. Research? He immediately checked the sender. Westbridge Medical Center Administration. It was real, and he wasn't excited at all. Surgery? Excellent. Trauma medicine? Fantastic. Research? Not so much. Unfortunately, the exchange program required rotations through multiple departments, including research. Several hours later, Ethan found himself standing inside the Westbridge Medical Research Center. The building looked completely different from the hospital. Quiet hallways, laboratories, conference rooms, computer workstations, very few patients, very few emergencies, and absolutely no trauma alerts. The atmosphere felt strange. A coordinator guided several exchange residents into a meeting room. Among them were Noah Bennett, Lena Carter, Marcus Hale, and several others. Apparently everyone would experience the same rotation. A woman entered moments later. Early 30s, professional appearance, white research coat, confident posture. Dr. Sophia Reynolds, Director of Clinical Research. For the first time, Ethan noticed Noah sit up straighter. Interesting. That alone told him how respected she was. Dr. Reynolds placed several folders on the table. Most surgeons dislike research. Several residents looked guilty, including Ethan. The researcher smiled. At least you're honest. A few residents laughed. The atmosphere immediately relaxed. Unlike Professor Cross, Dr. Reynolds seemed approachable, friendly, dangerous in a completely different way. Medicine changes because of research. She continued. The procedures you perform, the medications you prescribe, the protocols you follow. Someone had to discover them first. The statement was difficult to argue with. Then assignments were distributed. Each resident received a project. Ethan opened his folder. Clinical outcomes following emergency splenectomy. His eyes widened. The topic sounded familiar. Very familiar. The recent trauma patient. The splenic injury. The surgery with Professor Cross. Apparently luck was following him again. Or perhaps the hospital planned it intentionally. For the next several days, Ethan reviewed patient records, research data, treatment outcomes, statistical reports. At first, he hated it. The work felt slow, painfully slow. No emergencies, no operating rooms, no life-saving interventions. Just data, lots of data. Then something unexpected happened. He began noticing patterns. Certain treatment approaches produced better outcomes. Certain complications appeared repeatedly. Certain surgical decisions changed long-term recovery. The numbers told stories, patient stories, and suddenly research became more interesting. A week later, Dr. Reynolds called several residents into a conference room. Presentation day. The words immediately triggered anxiety. Apparently medicine never escaped presentations. One by one, residents presented their findings. Some performed well, others struggled. Then Ethan's turn arrived. He walked toward the front, connected his slides, took a breath, and began. Unlike previous presentations, he focused on practical applications, not just statistics. How the data influenced patient care, how it influenced surgical decisions, how it improved outcomes. The room remained surprisingly attentive. Even Dr. Reynolds appeared interested. When the presentation ended, several questions followed. Ethan answered carefully, confidently, without realizing it. His leadership training was already helping. Finally, Dr. Reynolds nodded. Good. Another Westbridge compliment. Apparently, they only knew 3 positive words. Good. Interesting. Acceptable. Anything beyond that probably required special permission. After the presentation ended, residents slowly left the room. Ethan packed his materials, preparing to leave. Then Dr. Reynolds stopped him. Vale. Here we go again. He turned. Yes, doctor? He handed him a document. Read this. The title immediately caught his attention. National Young Surgeons Research Conference. His eyes widened. The event was one of the largest medical conferences in the kingdom. Attendance alone was competitive. Presentation opportunities were even rarer. Dr. Reynolds smiled slightly. I think you should apply. For a moment, Ethan wasn't sure what to say. Another opportunity. Another challenge. Another door opening. Westbridge seemed determined to keep increasing the difficulty level. That evening, after entering the surgical simulation system, a new golden notification appeared. Research Division milestone. Research Understanding +4. Clinical Analysis +3. Presentation Skills +2. Special Trait unlocked. Evidence-based thinking. Current evaluation score. 87. Then another notification appeared. Future event detected. National Young Surgeons Conference. Difficulty. Very high. Potential rewards. Unknown. Ethan stared at the screen, then laughed, because every time he thought he understood the path ahead, another challenge appeared, and somehow, he was starting to enjoy it. End of Chapter 35. Chapter 36, A Circumflex Euros, the Conference Invitation. The National Young Surgeons Conference. The words stayed in Ethan's mind for days, even after returning to the trauma department, even during surgeries, even during rounds, because unlike competitions or hospital evaluations, this event was different. Conference attracted the most promising young doctors in the kingdom, future department chiefs, researchers, innovators, people who would shape medicine for decades, and somehow, Dr. Sophia Reynolds believed he belonged there. Ethan wasn't entirely convinced. Monday morning arrived with the usual chaos. Trauma alerts, emergency admissions, consultations. Westbridge Medical Center remained as relentless as ever. By now, however, Ethan was adapting. His decisions were faster, his confidence stronger, his hesitation less noticeable. Not perfect, but improving. The morning conference proceeded normally. Patient reviews, complication discussions, treatment planning. Then Professor Adrian Cross entered carrying several folders. Immediately, the room became silent. The trauma chief placed the folders on the table. Conference selections. Several residents straightened. Apparently, everyone knew what he meant. The National Young Surgeons Conference. Applications had closed weeks earlier. Today, the selected representatives would be announced. One by one, names appeared on the display screen. Westbridge Medical Center. Official representatives. Noah Bennett. Not surprising. Lena Carter. Also expected. Marcus Hale. Another obvious choice. Then the fourth name appeared. Ethan Vale. For a moment, he simply stared. Several residents looked equally surprised, including Ethan. Professor Cross continued speaking, as if nothing unusual had happened. The conference is an opportunity. His eyes swept across the room. Do not waste it. That was the entire speech. Classic Professor Cross. After the meeting ended, congratulations followed immediately. Some residents were sincere. Others appeared disappointed. Competition never truly disappeared inside elite hospitals. It simply became more polite. Later that afternoon, Noah found Ethan reviewing patient charts. Congratulations. Thanks. Noah pulled up a chair. You know who else is attending? Ethan shook his head. No. Noah smiled. Good. That wasn't reassuring. The Westbridge champion pulled out a conference brochure. Inside was a list of participating institutions. Royal Medical Institute, St. Victoria, National Surgical Academy, International Medical Consortium, and many others. Then Ethan noticed something else. A special section. Young Surgeon Research Competition. The winner would receive a research grant. Prestige. National recognition. The prize wasn't what caught Ethan's attention. Competition itself did, because the surgical simulation system suddenly activated. New event detected. Young Surgeon Research Competition. Difficulty. Extreme. Estimated success probability. 21%. Ethan nearly choked. 21%? That was lower than his trauma challenge prediction. Apparently the system had little faith in him, or perhaps the competition was simply brutal. That evening, Ethan entered the simulation system earlier than usual. A completely new environment appeared. Medical Conference Center. Massive auditoriums. Presentation halls. Research exhibits. Discussion panels. The scale was impressive. Then a notification appeared. Conference Preparation Program. Objective. Scientific presentation. Research defense. Professional networking. Professional networking? Ethan frowned. The system continued. Elite career development requires more than medicine. Fair enough. The first simulation began. Ethan stood on a stage. Hundreds of virtual doctors sat before him. A presentation screen illuminated behind him. His task seemed simple. Present research findings. Answer questions. Defend conclusions. 3 minutes later. Simulation failed. Cause. Poor audience engagement. Ethan stared. What? The system restarted immediately. Second attempt. Simulation failed. Cause. Weak response to criticism. Third attempt. Failed. Fourth. Failed. By the eighth attempt, Ethan finally understood. Presenting research wasn't about information. It was about communication. Convincing others. Defending ideas. Remaining calm under pressure. The challenge felt completely different from surgery, and somehow, almost as difficult. Hours later, after countless failures, he finally achieved his first passing evaluation. Presentation score, 81. Confidence score, 78. Professional communication, 84. A small improvement, but still improvement. As Ethan prepared to leave the simulation, another notification appeared. Future encounter detected. National Young Surgeons Conference. Important character arrival. Status. Pending. Ethan frowned. Important character? The system rarely used those words. Could it be another mentor? Arrival? Or something else entirely? For the first time, curiosity replaced exhaustion. Because the conference was only 2 weeks away, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt that something important was about to happen. End of Chapter 36. Chapter 37, A Circumflex Euros. The conference begins. 2 weeks pass quickly. Much too quickly. Between trauma rotations, simulation training, and conference preparation, Ethan barely noticed the days disappearing. Then suddenly, the National Young Surgeons Conference arrived. The event was hosted inside the Royal Convention Center, one of the largest conference facilities in the kingdom. When Ethan stepped through the entrance, he immediately understood why people considered this event prestigious. Hundreds of young doctors filled the building. Residents, researchers, fellows, young attending physicians. Medical companies displayed advanced technologies. Research posters covered entire hallways. Discussion panels occupied multiple auditoriums. Everywhere Ethan looked, medicine was being discussed. New surgical techniques, clinical trials, artificial intelligence, emergency medicine. medicine. Trauma surgery. The atmosphere felt completely different from a hospital. This wasn't about treating patients. This was about shaping the future of medicine. Noah Bennett walked beside him. First time? Ethan nodded. It shows. Thanks. Noah laughed. You'll get used to it. Unfortunately, Ethan wasn't convinced. Everyone here seemed impressive. Research awards, national scholarships, published papers, academic achievements. For the first time since arriving at Westbridge, he felt like the small town resident from St. Rowan again. Then the opening ceremony began. A famous surgeon took the stage, Professor Nathan Holloway, one of the kingdom's most respected trauma surgeons. His research had changed trauma protocols nationwide. Even Professor Cross respected him, which said everything. The keynote speech lasted nearly an hour, yet nobody looked bored, because the content was fascinating. Future surgical technologies, advanced trauma systems, robotic surgery, artificial intelligence support systems. The future seemed closer than Ethan expected. After the ceremony, attendees dispersed throughout the convention center. Research presentations began. Networking sessions opened. Panel discussions started. Ethan spent most of the afternoon attending trauma surgery lectures, until something unexpected happened. A young woman stepped onto a presentation stage. The room immediately became quieter, not because of her appearance, though she was certainly attractive, because of her reputation. Dr. Evelyn Hart, age 27, youngest attending surgeon at St. Victoria Hospital, National Research Award winner, published 16 research papers. 16. Ethan was still trying to publish his first. The difference felt absurd. The presentation began. For 40 minutes, she discussed trauma recovery outcomes. Confident, professional, intelligent. The audience remained completely engaged, including Ethan. When the presentation ended, questions immediately followed. Several senior doctors challenged her conclusions. She answered every question calmly, without hesitation, without uncertainty. Watching her felt strangely familiar, because she possessed something Ethan still lacked. Absolute confidence, kind that came from years of experience, the kind he hoped to develop someday. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan prepared to leave. Then Dr. Evelyn Hart walked directly past him. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Nothing happened. No dramatic moment. No conversation. She simply continued walking. Yet a familiar notification suddenly appeared. Important character confirmed. Evelyn Hart. Relationship status. Unknown. Potential future influence. Hi. Ethan nearly walked into a wall. The system had finally identified the mystery. This important character, and somehow that made him even more curious. End of Chapter 37. Chapter 38a. Circumflex Euros, the research competition. The second day of the conference began much earlier. Today was important. Very important. The Young Surgeon Research Competition. One of the conference's most prestigious events. The winner would receive national recognition, funding opportunities, and significant career advantages. Unfortunately, competition also contained some of the smartest young doctors in the kingdom. Not ideal. Participants gathered inside a massive presentation hall. Several judges sat at the front, including Professor Nathan Holloway. The pressure immediately increased. Each competitor would present research, defend conclusions, answer questions, simple in theory, terrifying in practice. One by one, presentations began. The quality shocked Ethan. Research involving advanced trauma protocols, new surgical techniques, emergency response systems. Every presentation seemed exceptional. His confidence slowly decreased. Then his turn arrived. Ethan walked onto the stage. The bright lights felt hotter than usual. Hundreds of eyes focused on him. The same anxiety from the simulation returned. This time, something was different. He had prepared. For weeks, countless simulation hours, countless practice presentations, countless failures. The system had forced him through all of them. Now it was time to see whether the effort mattered. Ethan took a breath, then began. His presentation focused on emergency splenectomy outcomes. Not the most exciting topic, but an important one. Instead of overwhelming the audience with statistics, he focused on patient care, decision-making, clinical outcomes, real world applications. The strategy worked. People listened. Questions followed. Several judges challenged his conclusions. Others questioned methodology, exactly like the simulations. For nearly 20 minutes, Ethan defended his research, calmly, confidently, without realizing it. He was no longer the hesitant resident from St. Rowan. The presentation finally ended. Applause followed, not thunderous, but genuine. As Ethan stepped off stage, a familiar voice stopped him. Good presentation. He turned. Dr. Evelyn Hart. For a moment, Ethan wondered whether someone else stood behind him. There wasn't. Thank you. Professional. Simple. Yet his heartbeat still accelerated slightly, because praise from someone like Evelyn Hart meant something. Before he could continue the conversation, another presenter was called. The moment ended. Brief, but memorable. That evening, the competition results were announced. Third place, Marcus Hale. Second place, Lena Carter. The audience applauded. Then the final result appeared. First place, Ethan Vale. Westbridge Medical Center Exchange Program. Silence. Then applause erupted. Even Ethan looked surprised. He genuinely hadn't expected to win. Not here. Not against competitors like these. As he accepted the award, a golden notification appeared. Major achievement completed. National Research Competition Champion. Rewards granted. Research, Skill +6. Professional Communication +5. Confidence +4. Special reward. National Recognition Status unlocked. Current evaluation score, 90. For the first time since obtaining the system, his evaluation score had reached elite level. And somewhere in the audience, Professor Cross smiled slightly. A rare sight. One few people noticed. But Ethan did. And somehow, that felt almost as rewarding as the trophy itself. Of Chapter 38. Chapter 39, a Circumflex Euros, the national ranking. Winning the Young Surgeon Research Competition changed everything. The moment the conference ended, Ethan noticed it. People recognized him. Not everywhere, not constantly, but enough. Doctors he had never met greeted him. Researchers approached him. Residents asked questions. For the first time, his name existed beyond St. Rowan and Westbridge. National recognition. The word still felt unreal. 3 days later, Ethan returned to Westbridge Medical Center. The hospital looked exactly the same. The patients hadn't changed. The trauma alerts continued. Yet something felt different. He had changed. Monday morning began with the weekly departmental meeting. Professor Adrian Cross stood at the front of the conference room. A large screen illuminated behind him. Monthly exchange program rankings. Immediately, every resident paid attention. These rankings determined reputation, future opportunities, mentorship selections, advanced training programs. The list appeared. 1. Noah Bennett, score 92. 2. Ethan Vale, score 90. 3. Lynna Carter, score 89. The room became quiet, very quiet. Only 2 points. The difference between Ethan and Noah was now only 2 points. A month ago, the gap had seemed impossible. Now it looked reachable. Across the room, Noah noticed the rankings. Instead of concern, he smiled. The same confident smile as always. After the meeting ended, Noah approached him, getting closer. Ethan laughed. Only 2 points. Noah nodded. Exactly. Neither sounded upset, because both understood something. Competition made them stronger. Without Noah, Ethan might never have pushed himself this far. Without Ethan, Noah might have become comfortable. The rivalry benefited both of them. That afternoon, another surprise arrived. Professor Cross personally requested Ethan's presence. Again, by now, Ethan had learned something. When Professor Cross wanted to see you, something important was usually about to happen. The trauma chief's office remained as simple as ever. Patient files, medical journals, computer monitors, no unnecessary decoration. Cross handed him a folder. Read. Ethan opened it. Advanced Trauma Fellowship Selection Program. His eyes widened. Fellowship represented one of the most prestigious training pathways in the kingdom. Future trauma surgeons competed for years to enter. Most applicants were senior residents. Some were already attending physicians. Ethan was only in his first year. Sir, Cross interrupted. You're not ready? Well, that was honest. Then Cross continued. But someday you might be. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared, because those words carried enormous weight. Professor Cross wasn't the type to offer encouragement casually. If he believed Ethan had potential, that mattered a lot. That evening, the surgical simulation system activated immediately after he entered. Major career path detected. Advanced Trauma Fellowship. Current eligibility, insufficient. Estimated readiness, 38%. Ethan frowned. 38%? The system was ruthless. Then again, it was probably right. The fellowship represented the highest level of trauma training. If anything, 38% sounded generous. End of chapter 39. Chapter 48 Circumflex Euros, the midnight emergency. 2 nights later, Ethan was assigned an overnight trauma shift. One of the busiest shifts in medicine. The city never stopped. Neither did accidents. At midnight, the trauma department remained surprisingly calm. Residents completed charts. Nurses reviewed medications. Doctors drank coffee. Everyone knew the peace wouldn't last. It never did. At 12:47 a.m., the trauma alert sounded. The entire department instantly transformed. A major incident. Multiple casualties. The information arrived quickly. Passenger bus collision. Several critical patients. Numerous injuries. Within minutes, ambulances began arriving. The atmosphere became chaotic. Controlled chaos. Found Westbridge handled better than almost any hospital. Professor Cross was already present. So was Noah Bennett, and nearly every available trauma surgeon. The first patient arrived. Then another. Then another. Critical injuries everywhere. Chest trauma. Head injuries. Internal bleeding. Fractures. The trauma base filled rapidly. For nearly an hour, nobody stopped moving. Ethan moved between patients continuously. Assessment, documentation, treatment support. The workload felt endless. Then one patient arrived who immediately caught his attention. Male, approximately 17 years old, unconscious, low blood pressure, rapid heart rate, possible abdominal bleeding. The symptoms felt familiar, very familiar, almost identical to multiple simulation cases. The trauma team prepared imaging, yet before results returned, Ethan noticed something unusual. The teenager's left shoulder showed signs of referred pain, a detail many people overlooked, but not Ethan, not after hundreds of simulation hours. Kayer's sign, a classic indicator of splenic injury. His heartbeat accelerated. If he was right, the patient could deteriorate rapidly. Without hesitation, he informed the attending physician. The concern was taken seriously. Additional evaluation followed immediately. Minutes later, imaging confirmed it. Major splenic injury. Active bleeding. Emergency surgery became necessary. The patient was rushed directly to the operating room, and because of the early recognition, valuable time had been saved. Hours later, after the operation ended successfully, Professor Cross reviewed the case. Several trauma surgeons discussed the timeline, the diagnosis, the intervention, the outcome. Finally, Cross looked toward Ethan. Good observation. There it was again. Another rare compliment. This time, however, several senior residents heard it, including Noah, including attending physicians, including department leadership. The impact spread quickly, because everyone understood something. Professor Cross only praised people when they earned it. At sunrise, the trauma department finally became quieter. The crisis had passed. Lives had been saved, and another long night ended. As Ethan walked toward the hospital cafeteria, exhausted but satisfied, a golden system notification appeared. Major achievement. Critical trauma recognition. Rewards granted. Clinical observation +5. Trauma diagnosis +4. Emergency assessment +3. Special trait upgraded. Trauma instinct. Current evaluation score 92. Ethan stopped walking. 92. The same score as Noah Bennett. For the first time since arriving at Westbridge, the gap had disappeared, and somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew the next challenge would be even harder, because reaching the top was difficult. Staying there, that was far more dangerous. End of chapter 40.